Imagine holding a beautifully illustrated medieval map in your hands, the parchment slightly yellowed with age, the ink still vibrant with blues and golds, coastlines curling like elegant script across the page. You trace your finger along the routes of long-forgotten explorers, past sea monsters and sailing ships sketched in the margins. It feels like a window into another world, a guide to lands both known and mysterious. But what if this map was never meant to guide you honestly? What if every intricate detail, every winding river and carefully drawn mountain range was part of an elaborate lie? Welcome to the shadowy and fascinating world of medieval cartography, where maps were far more than tools for navigation. They were instruments of power, espionage, and royal intrigue. In an age when knowledge was the ultimate currency, kings and queens commissioned these masterpieces not just to document their domains, but to conceal, manipulate, and control. Cartographers, working under the watchful eyes of their powerful patrons, embedded hidden messages, invented entire landmasses, and wove coded symbols into their works, all designed to mislead rivals, protect treasures, and redirect the course of history itself. These deceptions were crafted with such skill and subtlety that they often went unnoticed for centuries, hiding in plain sight on some of the most celebrated maps ever created. Today, we're setting out on a journey to unravel what historians call the Mapmakers Deception. We'll explore how phantom islands lured sailors into treacherous waters, how encrypted symbols pointed the way to hidden troves of gold, and how deliberately distorted geography gave certain empires the upper hand in war and trade. This is a story about art and secrecy, about loyalty and betrayal, and about the thin line between discovery and deceit. These maps didn't just represent the world, they shaped it, influencing everything from global exploration to the rise and fall of kingdoms. And what's truly remarkable is that their secrets still captivate us today, challenging how we see not only the past, but the very nature of truth and representation. So settle in, because you're about to see medieval maps in a whole new light as some of history's most elegant and enduring lies. To understand why these deceptions were so crucial, we need to step into the mindset of a medieval ruler. This was a world without satellites, without instant communication, where the precise layout of a neighboring kingdom or the configuration of a distant coastline was often a matter of rumor and speculation. In this environment, a map was not just a piece of art, it was a database of power. The monarch who possessed the most accurate geographical knowledge held a tremendous advantage, while those relying on false or incomplete information could be led into disaster. This made the royal cartographer one of the most vital and yet most secretive figures in any court. They weren't merely scribes, they were geographers, intelligence analysts, and artists rolled into one, tasked with translating the kingdom's most sensitive secrets into a visual language that only a select few could truly understand. Their work had to serve two masters. It had to present a public face of order, control, and divine right to rule, while simultaneously containing a hidden layer of confidential data. A map hanging in a great hall, for instance, might show the king's lands expansive and fertile, his cities large and prosperous, while the territories of his rivals might appear shrunken, barren, or even peppered with illustrations of dragons or other perils to suggest they were wild and ungovernable. This was pure propaganda, designed to impress foreign ambassadors and intimidate potential challengers. But that same map, when read by the king and his most trusted advisors, might tell a different story entirely. Subtle marks could indicate the locations of fords shallow enough for an army to cross, hidden valleys where troops could be concealed, or remote coastlines where supply ships could land undetected. The cartographer's pen could effectively erase a vulnerable mountain pass from existence or invent a non-existent swamp to slow an invading force. This duality meant that the mapmaker was constantly walking a tightrope. Their loyalty had to be absolute, for they knew where the royal treasures were buried, the secret routes used by spies, and the true weaknesses in the kingdom's defenses. A single act of carelessness or worse, betrayal could compromise everything. The price for such a mistake was not just a ruined reputation. It could be imprisonment, exile, or even execution. The power dynamics of the medieval world were thus literally drawn onto parchment, with every line, symbol, and color choice representing a calculated move in a continuous, silent game of thrones. Now, let's dive into one of the most creative and enduring deceptions in the mapmaker's toolkit, the invention of entire landmasses out of thin air. Medieval cartographers didn't just tweak coastlines or nudge borders. They conjured whole islands from myth and imagination, planting them squarely on the map to serve the ambitions of their royal patrons. These phantom islands are a fascinating blend of artistry and strategy, designed to look completely real to the untrained eye. Imagine you're a 15th century Portuguese sea captain setting sail into the vast, uncharted Atlantic. You've paid a small fortune for what you believe is the most accurate chart available, showing not only known lands but also promising new islands rumored to be rich with gold, spices, or fresh water. You follow the chart precisely, risking your ship and your crew, only to find endless, empty ocean where the island was supposed to be. That was the power of the Phantom Island, a geographical trap that could waste a rival's resources, lead them into dangerous storms or icebergs, or simply divert them from the real prize. Perhaps the most famous of these invented places is High Brassel, a mist-shrouded island that appeared on maps west of Ireland for hundreds of years. It was often depicted as a perfect circle with a river running straight through its center, and legends said it appeared only once every 7 years, cloaked in fog. But this wasn't just a fun bit of folklore, it was a deliberate tool of misdirection. By placing High Brassel on their maps, cartographers working for crowns like England or Portugal could create a decoy for rival Spanish or French explorers. While competitors were chasing this phantom, their own nation's ships could be exploiting the real, lucrative fishing grounds or trade routes they had deliberately left off the chart. It was a brilliant way to protect economic interests without firing a single shot. Other phantom islands served more symbolic purposes. In an age when claiming new lands was a point of immense prestige, a map could be used to assert sovereignty over territories that hadn't even been fully explored yet. A cartographer might draw an island, give it a grand nationalistic name, and add a royal coat of arms, effectively planting a flag on parchment. This sent a clear message to other European powers: this is ours. Keep out. Even if the island didn't exist, its presence on a respected map could be enough to support a king's territorial claims in diplomatic negotiations. It was a bold bluff backed by the authority of the cartographer's art. To make these lies believable, mapmakers often wove elaborate stories around their inventions. They populated these fictional islands with detailed illustrations, bustling ports, strange creatures, or even notes in the margin describing the habits of the native people. Some charts showed sea monsters lurking in the waters nearby, a clever psychological trick to make sailors think twice about venturing too close to the areas the crown wanted to protect. By blending a little truth with a lot of fiction, these deceptions became incredibly resilient. A sailor who did spot an unexpected rock or a patch of fog might report back that he'd seen the edge of High Brassel, perpetuating the myth for another generation. This practice didn't just manipulate individual voyages, it shaped the entire course of exploration, sending expeditions down dead ends and sometimes delaying the discovery of real lands for decades. The Phantom Island was more than a cartographic prank. It was a weapon of information warfare, proving that sometimes the most powerful lies are the ones we desperately want to believe. But the art of cartographic deception went far beyond simply inventing land that wasn't there. The most sophisticated mapmakers wove secrets into the very fabric of their creations, embedding encrypted symbols and hidden codes that transformed a beautiful map into a clandestine communication tool for the crown. Think of these maps not as simple guides, but as intricate puzzles crafted in ink and vellum, where every illustration, every flourish of the pen could carry a double meaning known only to the cartographer and his royal patron. This layer of hidden information turned a captured map from a strategic windfall into a dangerous trap for any enemy who couldn't crack the code. These secret messages were often conveyed through a language of symbols that would appear innocent or decorative to the uninitiated. A compass rose, for instance, was an essential navigational tool on any chart, but a series of them placed at specific points could be used to trace a hidden bearing. By drawing an imaginary line from the center of one carefully chosen rose to the next, a trusted agent could be guided to a secluded cove perfect for a clandestine landing or a remote cave serving as a hidden armory. The alignment of stars in a drawn constellation might not reflect the actual night sky, but instead point toward a safe house in a foreign city. Even the animals sketched in the margins or within the landscapes were rarely just whimsical decorations. A lion might symbolize a friendly stronghold or a loyal ally, while a serpent or a dragon could be a warning of a treacherous governor or a region controlled by spies. The specific way a ship was drawn, its sails full or furled, its flag flying a certain way could indicate whether a port was safe to enter or under surveillance. The complexity of these codes required an agreed-upon cipher, a kind of visual shorthand shared exclusively between the mapmaker and the court. This could involve subtle variations in the calligraphy used for place names. The lettering for a town that was a known hotbed of rebellion might be ever so slightly distorted or slanted, a tiny signal to the king that this area required caution. Heraldic motifs were another powerful tool. The inclusion of a specific noble family's coat of arms in an unexpected location wasn't a mistake. It was a clear indicator of that family's influence or ownership over that territory, information crucial for diplomacy or military planning. Astrological signs placed near a city could denote the best or worst times for an operation based on astrological charts believed to influence events. The genius of this system was its deniability. If a map was intercepted by a rival power, its surface-level information might still be valuable and appear complete. An enemy spy would see a wonderfully detailed and accurate-seeming chart, never suspecting that the most critical intelligence was hidden in plain sight within the art itself. They might use the map to plan an invasion route, completely unaware that the charming drawing of a deer in a forest was actually marking the location of an ambush point. Or they might sail to a harbor marked as safe, not seeing the tiny, almost imperceptible wolf's head in the corner that the cartographer used to code it as a hostile den. This practice elevated the mapmaker from a mere draftsman to a master of espionage, their true artistry lying not in the beauty of the coastlines, but in the brilliance of the deception. Their work ensured that the most powerful secrets of the realm remained secure, locked within a puzzle that only the right eyes could ever solve. While hidden symbols and phantom islands relied on artistic invention, the third great deception was far more mathematical and insidious in its subtlety. Cartographers mastered the art of deliberate distortion, warping the very scale and measurements of their maps to mislead anyone who wasn't in on the secret. Imagine a map where the distances between points were not a true representation of reality, but a carefully calculated lie. A day's march could be stretched to look like two, or a narrow, easily fordable river might be drawn so wide and imposing that an invading army would simply choose another route. This wasn't about erasing features entirely or inventing new ones. It was about taking the truth and bending it just enough to serve a hidden purpose, creating a world that was recognizably real yet dangerously misleading. The strategic advantages of this kind of manipulation were immense, particularly in military planning. A castle perched on a vulnerable hill might be drawn significantly smaller and farther from a key forest that could provide cover for attackers. An enemy general studying the map would underestimate the garrison's size and overestimate the open ground his troops would have to cross, leading to a disastrously misjudged assault. Conversely, a kingdom's own strong defensive positions, a narrow mountain pass perfect for an ambush, or a high cliff ideal for positioning archers, could be exaggerated in scale to appear even more formidable and impenetrable than they already were. This psychological warfare on parchment could deter aggression before a single soldier was ever mobilized, saving the kingdom resources and lives. Trade and maritime commerce were also prime targets for this kind of cartographic trickery. A bustling, wealthy port city that was a crown jewel of a kingdom's economy might have its harbor entrance drawn to appear shallower than it truly was. To a foreign merchant captain consulting the map, this suggested that only smaller, local vessels with shallow drafts could enter safely, discouraging him from attempting to dock and compete with native traders. Meanwhile, a less important but strategically located harbor that the crown wanted to develop could have its depths exaggerated, attracting more trade and wealth to a region they sought to bolster. The map became a tool for economic engineering, directing the flow of goods and gold with nothing more than a few manipulated depth soundings and a shifted scale bar. The brilliance of this deception lay in its plausibility. Unlike a blatantly fictional island that might eventually be disproven by a brave explorer, a subtly distorted scale was almost impossible to detect without modern surveying tools or local knowledge. A traveler might find that a journey took less time than the map suggested, but they would likely chalk it up to their own good pace or favorable weather, never suspecting the cartographer's deliberate hand. The map retained its overall authority and usefulness for general navigation, which is precisely what made the specific, targeted lies so effective. They were hidden within a framework of truth, a whisper of deception in a chorus of accurate information. By mastering the mathematics of misdirection, the medieval mapmaker didn't just draw the world. They redesigned it to give their patron an invisible yet undeniable advantage. While altering scales and inventing islands required active creativity, some of the most effective cartographic lies were born from a simple, powerful act of omission. Imagine a map that appears perfectly accurate, showing towns, rivers, and coastlines with meticulous detail, yet it is dangerously incomplete. This was the fourth great deception, the strategic removal of crucial landmarks. Under direct orders from their royal patrons, mapmakers would surgically erase features that were vital for survival and success, turning a seemingly helpful guide into a silent saboteur for anyone not in possession of the full truth. A mountain pass that offered the only safe passage through a treacherous range could simply vanish from the parchment. A reliable freshwater spring in an otherwise arid region might be conspicuously absent. A hidden, deep-water bay perfect for a surprise naval landing would appear as an unbroken, inhospitable cliff face. These weren't errors, they were calculated acts of cartographic censorship. The impact of these omissions was felt most acutely in military campaigns. An army on the move is a complex and vulnerable machine, utterly dependent on reliable intelligence about the terrain ahead. Its commanders need to know where to find water for thousands of men and horses, where the roads are wide enough for supply wagons, and which valleys offer shelter from the elements or from enemy scouts. A map that deliberately hides these features is a weapon of mass confusion. An invading force, trusting a captured or purchased map, could march confidently into a region only to find itself stranded without fresh water, forced to abandon its heavy siege equipment at an unmarked narrow gorge, or funneled into an exposed killing field where no defensive pass was marked to offer escape. The map, by what it didn't show, could orchestrate an entire army's defeat without a single friendly soldier needing to be present. This practice was equally potent in economic warfare. Consider the value of a single, perfect natural harbor along a rocky coastline. For a kingdom, it might be the secret heart of its fishing industry or a clandestine hub for receiving valuable imports away from the prying eyes of tax collectors or competitors. The moment that harbor appears on a widely distributed map, it becomes a target for rivals. The solution was elegant and simple: leave it off entirely. To any foreign merchant or competing power studying the map, that stretch of coast would appear useless, a place of jagged rocks and pounding surf to be avoided. This ensured that the kingdom's lucrative maritime activities could continue in peace, their economic advantage protected not by navies, but by the empty space on a page. The wealth generated there remained a state secret, hidden in the most obvious place imaginable, nowhere. The true genius of this deception was its perfect deniability. If confronted, a cartographer or the monarch who commissioned him could always claim the omission was a simple mistake, an oversight made during the difficult process of compiling reports from travelers and explorers. After all, the world was vast and knowledge was incomplete. Who could say for certain what might have been accidentally left out? This veil of plausible innocence made the tactic incredibly difficult to counter. A phantom island might eventually be sailed through and disproven, but how do you prove the existence of something that isn't there to find? You would have to already know the secret to know the map was lying, and by that point the deception had already served its purpose. The silent, empty spaces on the map became the most secure vaults for a kingdom's most precious strategic secrets. Beyond simply hiding the truth, the fifth and perhaps most cunning deception involved actively constructing a lie, weaving entirely fictional pathways into the very geography of a region. Cartographers, acting on royal command, didn't just erase inconvenient mountain passes. They drew enticing new ones that never existed. They sketched roads that promised safe passage but led only to trackless wastes, river branches that appeared navigable but dwindled into seasonal marshes, and mountain trails that seemed to offer a shortcut only to terminate at a sheer cliff face. These decoy pathways were the cartographic equivalent of a baited trap, designed to misdirect, delay, and exhaust anyone who wasn't following a secret, true chart. The strategic value of these false routes was immense, particularly in times of war. An invading army, reliant on captured or purchased maps for its campaign, could be led into a logistical nightmare. Imagine a general planning his invasion route. He sees on his map a welcoming valley that promises an easy march straight into the heart of the enemy kingdom, bypassing their heavily fortified border castles. He commits his entire force to this route, only to find that the valley is a box canyon, sealed at the end by impassable rock walls. His massive army, with its supply trains and siege engines, is now trapped, vulnerable to attack, disease, and starvation. The map itself has become a weapon, orchestrating the army's defeat without a single defensive soldier ever needing to fire an arrow. The kingdom's real defenses remain untouched, their strength preserved because the enemy was lured into a geographic dead end invented by a man with a quill pen. This manipulation extended far beyond the battlefield into the realms of commerce and religion. Pilgrimage routes, for instance, were the superhighways of the medieval world, funneling thousands of devout travelers and their money to sacred sites. Controlling this flow was a source of tremendous economic and political power. A local lord or bishop might commission a map that subtly redirected these pilgrim streams. By drawing a new, more appealing route that bypassed a rival town and led directly to their own cathedral, they could effectively steal the wealth and prestige that came with being a stop on the journey. The pilgrims, trusting their map, would never know they were being herded like sheep, their pious journey manipulated for someone else's profit. The mapmaker's false trail could bankrupt one town while enriching another, all under the guise of providing helpful guidance. The psychological brilliance of this deception was its exploitation of hope and trust. A traveler lost in a harsh landscape sees a clearly drawn road on their map and feels a surge of relief. Salvation seems assured. That emotional response makes the eventual discovery that the road is a fiction all the more crushing and disorienting. It wasn't just a simple error, it was a betrayal of the very trust placed in the map as an authority. This practice demonstrates the ultimate power these documents held. They were not passive reflections of the world but active instruments that could reshape reality, dictate human movement, and alter the fortunes of nations. With a few carefully placed lines of ink, a cartographer could create a parallel universe on parchment, one where the most promising path led only to ruin, protecting the true routes for those who held the power of the crown. Behind every one of these masterful deceptions stood a single, fascinating individual, the cartographer themselves. These were not mere scribes copying coastlines. They were figures living a profound double life, caught in a constant tug of war between their identity as artists and their duties as intelligence agents for the crown. To create a map that was both a beautiful work of art and a sophisticated tool of statecraft required a unique blend of skills: the observational eye of a scientist, the skilled hand of a painter, and the cunning mind of a spy. Their workshop was a place of creation and conspiracy, where a splash of gold leaf could celebrate a king's glory, even as a nearly invisible mark on the parchment betrayed the location of his secret gold mine. This dual loyalty defined their entire existence, placing them in a position of immense trust and even greater peril. The very nature of their work required them to be some of the most well-traveled people of their age. To gather the data needed for their maps, they journeyed to distant ports, climbed foreign mountains, and walked the streets of rival cities. They took detailed notes on everything: the depth of harbors, the width of rivers, the strength of fortifications, and the mood of the local populace. But these fact-finding missions were a perfect cover for espionage. A cartographer could openly sketch a city's layout under the guise of documenting its architecture, all while secretly counting the number of guards at a gate or noting the comings and goings of merchant ships. Their unique status often granted them access to places ordinary travelers could never go. They might be invited into a noble's court to present a map as a gift, all the while memorizing the faces and conversations around them. Upon returning home, their report to the king contained far more than just geographical measurements. It was a rich intelligence briefing on the economic health, military readiness, and political stability of a foreign land. The map they produced was the public-facing product of this journey, but the whispered secrets delivered in the royal chambers were often the true prize. This precarious existence demanded a level of discretion we can scarcely imagine today. A single slip of the pen, one careless line drawn a fraction of an inch out of place, could accidentally reveal a hidden troop movement or expose a network of agents. A map intended for public display might need to be scrubbed of any detail that could hint at a planned invasion or a vulnerable border. The pressure was immense, and the consequences of failure were severe. A cartographer whose deception was discovered by a foreign power could spark an international incident, giving a rival kingdom a pretext for war. Even a rumor of disloyalty could be enough to destroy a reputation built over a lifetime. Some mapmakers, like the renowned Abraham Cresques and his son Jehuda of the Catalan Atlas School, became legendary for their unwavering fidelity to their patrons, their names synonymous with accuracy and trust. Their loyalty was so valued that they were treated as esteemed members of the court, their craft seen as essential to the security of the realm. Yet for others, the temptation to monetize their unparalleled knowledge was overwhelming. A cartographer privy to a kingdom's most sensitive secrets was a walking treasure trove of information, and rival powers were often willing to pay a fortune for it. The choice was stark: remain loyal to a single patron or sell your skills to the highest bidder on the open market. Some chose the latter, becoming freelance agents of misinformation who played both sides against each other. This made every royal cartographer a potential security risk in the eyes of their monarch, a fact that added a layer of silent tension to their prestigious position. They lived with a constant awareness that their art could either ensure their legacy or become their death warrant, a reminder that in the shadowy world of medieval mapmaking, the line between celebrated artist and executed traitor was as fine as the ink lines they drew on a page. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most electrifying and contentious artifacts in the entire history of cartography, a document that sits at the very heart of our theme of deception, and one that continues to divide experts to this day: the Vinland Map. Discovered in the middle of the 20th century, this map instantly sent shockwaves through the historical community. It depicts not just Europe, Africa, and Asia, but also a large landmass in the distant Western Atlantic labeled as Vinlandia Insula, a place described in Norse sagas as a wooded coast explored by Leif Erikson around the year 1000. If authentic, this single piece of parchment would be monumental, rewriting the narrative of the discovery of the Americas and providing the first known cartographic evidence that Vikings had reached North America centuries before Columbus's famous voyage. The implications for history and for national pride would be immense, but from the moment it surfaced, the map was shrouded in doubt. The circumstances of its discovery were murky, emerging from a private collection and presented to the world with a questionable provenance. Scholars immediately began poking at its secrets, and the map seemed to poke back with more questions than answers. The style of the drawing and the Latin inscriptions didn't quite match other known medieval works perfectly. It was the scientific analysis, however, that truly ignited the controversy. When researchers examined the ink, they made a startling discovery. The black linework contained high levels of anatase, a very specific and rare form of titanium dioxide that was not commercially produced until the 1920s. Proponents of the map's authenticity argued that perhaps this mineral could have occurred naturally in medieval ink, a quirky anomaly that didn't automatically condemn the document. But for most experts, this was a smoking gun. It suggested the map was a brilliant 20th century forgery, cleverly crafted on genuinely old parchment, perhaps from a stripped medieval book but drawn with modern materials. This duality is what makes the Vinland Map such a perfect case study in cartographic deception, regardless of its ultimate truth. If it is a genuine 15th century creation, then it serves as a powerful example of how maps were used to assert historical precedence and territorial ambition. Imagine a Scandinavian cartographer, perhaps working for the King of Denmark and Norway, creating this map to visually cement Norse claims to these distant lands. It would be a bold statement of prior discovery, a piece of diplomatic propaganda meant to bolster national prestige and potentially stake a claim in the new age of exploration that was just dawning. It would be a map hiding a political secret in plain sight, the secret of who truly found the New World first. Conversely, if it is a forgery, it becomes an even more fascinating artifact. It demonstrates the enduring power of the map as a symbol of truth and authority. A forger in the 1950s or 60s would have understood that a map, more than any text, could rewrite history. They were manipulating the very tool that medieval kings used, proving that the allure of the cartographic lie had not diminished in 500 years. This forger wasn't just creating a fake, they were crafting a narrative preying on the world's desire for a dramatic historical revelation. They leveraged the mystique of the Vikings and the ongoing scholarly debate to create an object of immense desire and value. The deception was so sophisticated that it fooled some of the world's leading institutions for years, a testament to the forger's deep understanding of both history and human psychology. The cryptic annotations on the map only deepen the mystery. Scribbled in Latin are passages that seem to tell the story of the Norse exploration, mentioning figures like Leif Erikson and Bishop Eirik Gnupsson, who supposedly journeyed to Vinland. These texts are a tangled web of partial truths and historical references that feel just authentic enough to be plausible, yet contain enough subtle anachronisms to raise eyebrows. It's a masterclass in how to build a believable lie, weaving together real historical threads with invented details to create a compelling, but ultimately questionable story. The ongoing debate, fueled by successive rounds of advanced spectroscopic analysis, is a modern-day version of the same code-breaking we discussed earlier. Scholars are the new court advisors, using technology instead of ciphers to try and uncover the map's true origins. The Vinland Map stands as a timeless reminder that a map is never just a map. It is always a story, and sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones we are desperate to believe, even when the evidence warns us to be cautious. Moving from the contentious mystery of the Vinland Map, we find ourselves standing before a map where the deception is not hidden in ink chemistry, but is instead boldly displayed in a grand theological vision, the Hereford Mappa Mundi. This enormous masterpiece, drawn on a single sheet of calfskin, is far more than a geographical guide. It is a breathtaking act of ideological cartography, a worldview literally drawn to order. At first glance, it appears to be a purely spiritual document, a map of the Christian soul's journey through creation. But look closer, and you'll discover a brilliant and subtle deception, one that used the framework of faith to advance very earthly goals of power, control, and cultural supremacy. The most obvious and powerful manipulation is its orientation and center. Unlike modern maps that place north at the top, the Hereford Mappa Mundi is oriented with east at the apex, where the Garden of Eden is depicted, and most importantly, it places the city of Jerusalem at the exact center of the entire world. This was a profound geographical lie with a monumental theological purpose. By centering Jerusalem, the mapmaker wasn't just marking a holy city. He was making a declarative statement that the Christian faith was the literal center of all human existence. Every other nation, culture, and continent was defined by its relationship to that central point. This visually reinforced the concept of Christendom as the global norm, making the religious and political ambitions of the Church and the European crowns seem divinely ordained, a natural part of the universe's order. This central deception is compounded by what the mapmaker chose to place on the edges. The farther one's eye travels from Jerusalem, the more the world descends into strangeness and danger. The margins are populated with grotesque and terrifying creatures, the Blemii, a race of men with faces on their chests, the Cyopods who use a single giant foot to shade themselves from the sun, and dog-headed Cynosphali. These weren't just amusing fantasies, they were a deliberate form of propaganda. By depicting foreign, non-European peoples as monstrous aberrations, the map dehumanized them. It created a powerful visual, us versus them narrative, framing those outside the Christian world as inhuman others who existed on the literal fringes of God's creation. This cartographic othering provided a moral and theological justification for the Crusades and later colonization. If these distant lands were filled with monsters, then conquering them wasn't an act of aggression. It was a divine mission, a holy cleansing of the world's edges. Yet, for all its grand theological framing, the Mappa Mundi is also riddled with clues to real-world politics and hidden knowledge, proving that even this spiritual guide served an earthly master. Scattered among the biblical scenes and mythical beasts are illustrations of very real and contemporary medieval power structures. The map includes detailed depictions of over 500 cities and towns, but their size and prominence are not drawn to scale, they are drawn to importance. Rome is massive and detailed, reflecting the power of the papacy. The city of Hereford itself, where the map was created, is given a significance far beyond its actual size, a proud nod to the local bishop who likely commissioned the work. This wasn't just a map of the world, it was a map of patronage, showcasing the influence of the map's creator and his sponsor within the wider Christian hierarchy. Look even closer, and you might find subtle hints of political alliances and tensions. The depiction of certain kingdoms, the inclusion of specific trade routes, and the way certain historical events are illustrated all serve a purpose beyond mere education. They are visual assertions of authority and legitimacy. A ruler studying this map would see his domain placed in a divine context, his reign blessed by its proximity to Jerusalem, while a rival's lands might be minimized or associated with the monstrous races on the periphery. The map becomes a tool for internal propaganda, reinforcing the social order and the divine right of certain kings and bishops to rule. It's a stunningly effective blend of spiritual and temporal power, where a prayer and a political statement are one and the same, drawn in the same rich, colorful ink. The Mappa Mundi reminds us that in the medieval mind, faith and politics were inseparable, and a map could be the ultimate instrument for weaving them together into a persuasive and deceptive picture of the world. To create a forgery that could fool a king or an enemy admiral, a medieval mapmaker had to be a master of multiple arts, transforming his workshop into a laboratory of illusion. The process began not with ink, but with the very skin the map would be drawn upon, parchment made from the stretched and scraped hide of a calf, sheep, or goat, had to be carefully selected and aged to mimic the passage of time. A forger might acquire a blank page from an old, disused ledger or prayer book, carefully scraping away any existing text to create a seemingly pristine, ancient surface. Alternatively, they could artificially age new parchment by staining it with weak tea, wine, or even smoke, giving it that distinctive yellowish-brown patina that whispered of centuries spent in a dusty library chest. The texture was crucial too. It had to feel right under the fingertips of a suspicious courtier, its surface possessing the correct slight stiffness and unevenness of genuine aged vellum. The next and perhaps most critical step was the ink. This was where many modern forgeries are ultimately exposed, but a skilled medieval practitioner had an intimate, almost alchemical knowledge of his materials. He wouldn't use a standard iron gall ink. Instead, he would painstakingly recreate the unique recipes of a specific region or time period. This meant grinding his own pigments from minerals like lapis lazuli for deep blues, malachite for greens, and cinnabar for vibrant reds. He might even add binders like egg white or gum arabic to achieve the precise gloss and consistency seen in maps from a particular workshop. The most audacious forgers, aiming to create a document that purported to be a gift for a pope or emperor, would incorporate real gold leaf, carefully applying it with a fine brush and burnishing it to a soft glow, a costly investment that lent an air of undeniable authenticity and immense value to the deception. But the true artistry went far beyond mere materials. It was in the hand that wielded the pen. A master forger was a brilliant stylistic mimic. He would spend weeks, perhaps even months, studying the cartographic conventions of his target era. He had to master the specific flourishes of a certain school of map-making the exact way Catalan draftsmen drew their Portolan charts with room lines radiating from compass roses, or the distinctive Gothic blackletter script used by German monks for labeling. Every detail, from the shape of a sailing ship in the margin to the particular cross-hatching used for mountain ranges, had to be perfect. A single anachronism, a ship design that wouldn't be invented for another 50 years, or a letter form that had fallen out of fashion, could unravel the entire elaborate fiction. Their bag of tricks also included more mathematical deceptions. As we've discussed, deliberate distortion was a key tool for official royal cartographers, and forgers used this same principle to their advantage. They might employ geometric tricks to make a map look older, perhaps using an outdated projection that exaggerated the size of the Mediterranean Sea, a common feature in earlier maps based on Roman sources. Selective detail was another powerful technique. A forger creating a map supposedly from the 1400s might deliberately omit the Americas, or only show a vague, suggestive coastline, perfectly mirroring the incomplete knowledge of that time. They would include just enough accurate, verifiable information to build trust, while weaving in their specific lie a phantom island, a hidden route, a shifted border, seamlessly among the truths. Any slight error in geography could then be dismissed by a contemporary viewer as a simple limitation of the era's knowledge, a charming artifact of a less enlightened age, rather than recognized as the deliberate act of subterfuge it truly was. The forger's greatest skill was not in perfect imitation, but in the strategic placement of plausible imperfection. This manipulation of perception extended directly into the highest stakes arenas of medieval power, the negotiating table and the battlefield. Imagine a tense peace conference between two rival kingdoms, the air thick with suspicion and the potential for renewed conflict. The ambassadors and advisors gather around a large oak table, and to settle a disputed border, the host king's cartographer unrolls a magnificent, lavishly illustrated map. The visiting delegation leans in, studying the vivid colors and elegant script that depict the contested lands. What they are seeing, however, is not a neutral document but a carefully crafted instrument of psychological warfare. The king's own territories are drawn expansive and lush, his cities large and fortified, while the rival's lands appear smaller, less fertile, and perhaps even marked with subtle symbols suggesting instability or poverty. The border itself has been quietly nudged several miles into the enemy's actual territory. The king, with a confident smile, uses this map as the undeniable visual evidence to support his outrageous territorial demands. He knows his opponents lack any accurate surveys of their own to counter his claim. Their own maps might be decades out of date or simply less artistically persuasive. Faced with such a commanding and authoritative document, they are forced to negotiate from a position of weakness, potentially ceding valuable land, resources, or strategic advantages based on a complete fiction. The map in this context becomes a silent, powerful ally, its lies accepted as geographic fact. On the actual field of war, these deceptive documents took on an even more direct and dangerous role. Before a campaign even began, a monarch needed to secure funding and support from his often reluctant nobles. To rally them for a costly invasion, he might commission a map that deliberately minimized the challenges ahead. A wide, treacherous river that would normally require complex bridging equipment might be drawn as a narrow, easily fordable stream. Impassable mountain ranges could be depicted as gentle, rolling hills. The target city's formidable walls might be illustrated as low and crumbling. This cartographic optimism was designed to make the campaign appear swift, easy, and guaranteed of success, loosening the purse strings of the treasury and filling the ranks with optimistic volunteers. Conversely, that same king would provide his field generals with a very different set of maps, ones that exaggerated the threats posed by the enemy. The sizes of opposing fortresses could be inflated, their garrisons doubled on paper with a few strategic notations. This served to make the defending generals seem more cautious and brilliant when they achieved victory against such overwhelming odds, or it justified requests for more men and supplies from a homeland now fearful of a powerful foe. The most cunning military applications, however, were reserved for misleading the enemy directly. A falsified map could be intentionally allowed to fall into hostile hands through a staged act of carelessness, a captured scout carrying a seemingly vital satchel, or a disloyal courtier paid to pass secrets. This map would be a masterpiece of strategic misinformation. It might show a mountain pass where none existed, leading an invading army into a deadly ambush in a box canyon. It could depict a sprawling, impenetrable swamp across the only viable approach to a castle, causing the enemy to waste precious days or weeks seeking another route, all while the defenders strengthened their position. The success of this ruse relied entirely on the mapmaker's sublime skill in blending truth with fiction. The document had to be convincing enough to be believed, its lies nestled comfortably among enough verifiable truths to pass initial scrutiny. A single misplaced town or an incorrectly named river could betray the entire deception. The cartographer had to think like a military strategist, anticipating the enemy's questions and providing all the wrong answers, disguised as invaluable intelligence. In this shadowy game, a well-drawn line of ink could be more decisive than 1,000 knights, proving that in medieval statecraft, controlling the map often meant controlling the very reality upon which wars were fought and peace was won. Yet behind the grand palaces and royal commands, the individuals holding the quills often faced a quiet and profound moral struggle. We must remember that these cartographers were not cold-hearted spies or unfeeling technicians. They were artists and scholars, deeply devoted to the scholarly ideal of accurately representing God's creation. Their entire craft was rooted in the meticulous gathering of knowledge, the careful observation of the natural world, and the beautiful translation of that truth onto parchment. To then be ordered by a king or bishop to deliberately corrupt that truth, to twist their life's work into a vehicle for lies, must have created a terrible internal conflict. Every time they drew a coast they knew was false, or erased a mountain pass they had personally traversed, they were betraying their own artistic and intellectual integrity. The weight of that deception would have been a heavy burden to carry. The most immediate and haunting consequence of their work was the very real human cost. A cartographer sitting in a warm, well-lit scriptorium knew that the lines he was drawing could determine the fate of men he would never meet. A phantom island placed to protect a trade route might seem like a clever strategic move, but it could also lead a ship full of sailors and merchants into an ice field or onto unseen rocks, drowning them all for the sake of an economic advantage. A distorted scale that made a journey appear shorter could strand an army in a desert without supplies. A omitted freshwater spring could mean death by thirst for a group of travelers who trusted his map as a divine guide. These were not abstract geopolitical games. They were decisions with life or death ramifications. We can imagine a mapmaker lying awake at night, wondering if a storm he heard raging outside had just doomed a ship he had deliberately misled. That constant low hum of guilt must have been a familiar companion for many in this unusual profession. Some of these craftsmen found subtle, courageous ways to navigate this ethical tightrope, embedding tiny acts of conscience within their grand deceptions. A cartographer forced to draw a treacherous, non-existent route might include a nearly microscopic illustration of a shipwreck or a skull hidden in the waves along that false path, a silent, symbolic warning to any truly observant reader. Another might draw a serpent coiled around the name of a town that was a known den of spies, a visual cue for those in the know to avoid the area, even as the map's overall geography misled a broader audience. These tiny acts of rebellion were incredibly dangerous. If discovered by their royal patron, they could be seen as treasonous. But for the mapmaker, it was a way to salve his conscience, to offer a chance of redemption for those sharp-eyed enough to see the truth hidden within the lie. It was a desperate attempt to remain, in some small way, a man of knowledge in a world that demanded he be a man of secrets. For others, the justification was found in a higher loyalty to crown and country. In the turbulent and violent world of medieval Europe, stability was a fragile commodity. A mapmaker might truly believe that his deceptions were a necessary evil to protect his homeland from invasion, to ensure the economic prosperity that fed its people, or to prevent a wider war. He could frame his work not as a betrayal of truth, but as a patriotic duty, a service to the greater good that outweighed the potential for individual harm. This mindset transforms the cartographer from a mere artisan into a soldier on a hidden front, his pen serving as a weapon to defend the realm. The lies in this light become a form of protection, a shield woven from parchment and ink. This rationalization allowed them to reconcile their actions with their morals, viewing themselves as guardians of a fragile peace rather than purveyors of dangerous falsehoods. This human dimension, the tension between artistic truth and royal command, between a clear conscience and patriotic duty, adds a profound layer of complexity to these beautiful old maps. They are not just records of places, but also records of the silent ethical battles fought by the hands that drew them. So how do modern historians and scientists begin to untangle these centuries-old webs of lies? The process is a fascinating blend of high-tech forensic analysis and old-fashioned scholarly detective work, turning each map into a crime scene where every detail is a potential clue. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal is multispectral imaging, a technique that feels almost like science fiction. By photographing a map under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, researchers can see beneath the surface in ways the naked eye never could. Faint pencil lines, erased text, or earlier drafts hidden under layers of ink suddenly become visible, revealing the mapmaker's original intentions before they were painted over with deception. A coastline that now shows a phantom island might have a faint, erased line indicating the cartographer knew it wasn't there, or a hidden note in the margin might confess the forgery to a future generation. This technology allows us to virtually peel back the layers of time and see the map as a work in progress, watching the lie being constructed stroke by stroke. But the investigation doesn't stop with light. The very materials used to create the map can tell their own story through chemical analysis. experts used tools like X-ray fluorescence spectrometry to study the composition of the inks without damaging the precious parchment. This can reveal anachronisms that betray a forgery, like the infamous case of the Vinland Map with its modern titanium dioxide. Even with genuine period maps, ink analysis can be revealing. A map might use a rare, expensive blue pigment made from lapis lazuli in one region, but a common, cheap carbon black in another, suggesting that certain, important areas were added later as a form of emphasis or manipulation. The parchment itself is also a witness. By examining the animal skin under a microscope, specialists can determine its origin and age, and even identify the specific pattern of wormholes. If two maps from different parts of Europe show an identical pattern of wormholes, it's a strong clue they were stored together in the same library or chest, potentially connecting a deceptive map to a specific royal court or workshop. Of course, technology alone can't solve the puzzle. It must be paired with deep historical knowledge and comparative analysis. Historians act like detectives, cross-referencing alibis, placing the suspicious map side by side with other documents from the same era. They compare handwriting styles, the linguistic quirks of Latin inscriptions, and the artistic conventions for drawing ships, sea monsters, or compass roses. A single stylistic anachronism, a type of ship that wasn't built until decades after the map's supposed date, can unravel an entire deception. They also scour travelogues, merchant ledgers, and diplomatic correspondence from the period. If a map shows a bustling town on a riverbank, but every traveler's account from that time describes the area as an uninhabited marshland, the discrepancy is a huge red flag. This cross-referencing helps historians distinguish between an honest mistake based on limited knowledge and a deliberate, calculated lie designed to mislead. Perhaps the most thrilling corroboration comes from the ground itself, archaeology. A map might depict a castle guarding a strategic mountain pass, a claim that can be physically checked. If archaeologists survey the pass and find no evidence of any fortification, not even post holes for a wooden watchtower, the map's accuracy is called into question. Conversely, the discovery of a hidden, overgrown foundation stone exactly where a map hinted it might be is the kind of eureka, a moment that validates years of painstaking research. This marriage of the digital and the physical, of the laboratory and the library, allows us to slowly reverse engineer the cartographer's art. We're not just figuring out what they changed, we're beginning to understand why. Each uncovered secret, each spotted forgery, gives us a clearer window into the fears, ambitions, and ruthless political calculations of the medieval world, proving that every fold in the parchment holds a story waiting to be decoded. The ripple effects of these cartographic deceptions stretched far beyond the courts that commissioned them, fundamentally warping the very course of the age of exploration and leaving a legacy of both tragic misadventure and unintended progress. Consider the immense risk and investment behind every expedition setting sail into the unknown. A voyage could take years and consume a kingdom's wealth, with the lives of hundreds of sailors and the prestige of a nation resting on its success. Now imagine that entire enterprise being directed by a beautiful, authoritative, and utterly fabricated chart. This was the reality for countless explorers, whose missions were doomed from the start because their most trusted guide was a lie. The Phantom Island of Friesland is a perfect and profoundly costly example. This sizable landmass appeared just south of Iceland on maps for over a century, meticulously drawn and detailed by respected cartographers. It became a fixed point in the Atlantic, a promised way station for ships heading west. Expeditions were launched specifically to find and colonize it, and countless others altered their courses to include it in their journey, burning precious weeks of supplies sailing to a destination that existed only on paper. The sheer waste of resources, food, gunpowder, ship repairs, and most tragically, human lives lost to scurvy or shipwreck in these futile searches, is a staggering testament to the power of a well-placed ink blob. This systematic misinformation didn't just send people on wild goose chases, it actively caused them to overlook or dismiss genuine discoveries. A captain sailing through a stretch of empty ocean where a map insisted an island might assume his own calculations were wrong and fail to investigate a new, actual island just over the horizon. More consequentially, when explorers did encounter real land that didn't match their expectations, they sometimes struggled to reconcile it with the false geography they had been taught. A coastline might be dismissed as a minor outlier or misidentified as the edge of a known phantom, causing a true discovery to be lost for years. This created a frustrating feedback loop of error, where each new map copied the mistakes of the last, cementing geographical myths into accepted fact for generations. The persistence of these deceptions slowed the accurate mapping of our world by decades, perhaps even centuries, as the scientific process of exploration was constantly battling against a tide of deliberate fiction. Yet, in a fascinating twist of history, this landscape of cartographic lies also became an unexpected engine for innovation. The very prevalence of unreliable maps forced navigators, astronomers, and instrument makers to become better, more precise, and more skeptical. If you couldn't trust the chart, you had to trust the math. This drove rapid advancements in celestial navigation, as sailors learned to rely more on the sun and stars than on the flawed representations on their parchments. The quest for more accurate longitudinal calculations, one of the greatest scientific challenges of the era, was intensified by the high-profile failures of expeditions that had been misled by bad maps. Ship designers began creating vessels that were more seaworthy and capable of longer journeys, partly because captains needed the flexibility to correct course after realizing their charts had deceived them. The deception, intended to create advantage for one kingdom, inadvertently spurred a technological arms race that benefited all of maritime exploration. The need to see through the lies ultimately gave us better tools to see the truth. This tangled legacy of both profound hindrance and accidental progress forces us to confront a crucial idea: that maps are never neutral. They are human creations, and like any human creation, they are shaped by the ambitions, biases, and agendas of their makers and patrons. A map is not a perfect mirror of the world. It is a reflection of what the powerful wanted the world to be, or what they wanted others to believe it was. The quest to debunk these ancient myths, which continues in laboratories and archives today, has done more than just correct the historical record. It has expanded our understanding of history itself, revealing the complex interplay between power, knowledge, and deception. Each time we prove that an island was a fiction, we learn something new about the political fears of the king who ordered it drawn. Each time we decipher a hidden code, we gain insight into the secret strategies of a fallen empire. The lies, once uncovered, become a unique and powerful source of truth, telling us a story about our past that no honest map could ever reveal. But these maps were far more than just tools for espionage or navigation. They were profound cultural artifacts, layered with symbolism that revealed how medieval society saw itself and its place in the cosmos. The sea monsters, dragons, and strange creatures inhabiting the uncharted edges of the world were not simply the whimsical doodles of a bored artist. They were powerful psychological symbols, giving form to the deep-seated fears of the unknown that gripped the European mind. In an age where vast stretches of the ocean remained unexplored, the blank spaces on a map were terrifying voids, representing everything from the threat of shipwreck and disease to the fear of encountering cultures and peoples completely alien to their own. By populating these voids with fantastical beasts, the kraken that could drag an entire ship to the depths, or the serpent like Xiphias that preyed on sailors, cartographers were performing a kind of symbolic magic. They were transforming an abstract, existential fear into something concrete, tangible, and ultimately conquerable. A monster drawn on a map was a danger that could be named, avoided, and understood, making the vast, terrifying unknown feel just a little bit more manageable and defined. This symbolic language extended powerfully into the realm of religion and politics, where every decorative element served a deliberate purpose. The elaborate borders of a map presented to a king or pope were not just pretty frames. They were visual manifestos celebrating dynastic power and divine right. Heraldic shields, portraits of ruling families, and illustrations of victorious battles were often woven into the cartouche or the margins, directly linking the geographical information to the authority of the patron. A map of a kingdom, therefore, became a portrait of the king himself, his lands, his achievements, his God-given right to rule. This was propaganda in its most elegant form, reinforcing the social hierarchy for anyone privileged enough to view the document. It communicated a clear message: this land and everything in it belongs to this ruler, and his power is as permanent and natural as the mountains and rivers themselves. The map didn't just describe territory, it legitimized ownership through a breathtaking blend of art and geography. Perhaps the most pervasive symbolic deception was the way these maps framed the entire worldview, placing Europe and Christianity firmly at the center of God's creation. As we saw with the Hereford Mappa Mundi, Jerusalem was often depicted as the literal navel of the world, with all other continents radiating out from this holy epicenter. This was a profound geographical lie that carried immense theological weight. It visually argued that Christian Europe was the focal point of human history and divine attention, while other lands and peoples existed on the periphery, both literally and spiritually. The farther one traveled from this center, the more the maps suggested the world descended into chaos, sin, and monstrosity. This symbolism provided a powerful moral justification for expansionism, crusades, and colonization. If the edges of the world were populated by monstrous races and pagan empires, then conquering them wasn't an act of aggression. It was a holy mission, a civilizing endeavor to bring order to chaos and light to darkness. The map, through its symbolic vocabulary, made imperialism seem like a divine duty. By decoding this rich symbolic layer, we gain a much deeper understanding of the medieval mindset, a world where the physical and the spiritual were inseparable. Geography was not a neutral science, it was a narrative, a story told by the powerful about the nature of reality, their place within it, and their rights over it. The monsters, the borders, the orientation, and the omissions were all part of this story. They were the emotional and psychological engine of the deception, making the lies not only believable but also desirable. They appealed to a viewer's faith, their pride, their fears, and their prejudices, ensuring the map's message was absorbed on a subconscious level. This symbolic depth transformed a functional document into a persuasive masterpiece, proving that the most effective deceptions are those that tell us exactly what we want to hear about ourselves and our world. While the grand deceptions we've explored were orchestrated by kings and popes, they were ultimately executed by the skilled hands of a select few individuals, cartographers whose names became synonymous with both breathtaking artistry and masterful subterfuge. These were the rock stars and shadowy spies of the medieval geographical world, figures who walked a razor's edge between celebrated genius and suspected agent. Their reputations were built on a paradoxical foundation. The public celebrated them for the stunning accuracy and beauty of their charts, while a select few powerful patrons valued them for the brilliant lies they could weave into those very same works. Consider the enigmatic figure often referred to by historians as the draftsman of secrets. This was not a single cartographer, but rather a title that seems to apply to a handful of extraordinarily skilled and discreet mapmakers who operated as freelance agents of misinformation, selling their services to the highest bidder across various European courts. Unlike a cartographer bound to a single king, the draftsman of secrets was a geopolitical mercenary. He might create a map for the English crown one year, subtly diminishing the coasts of France, and then several years later produce a chart for the French king that conveniently omitted a key English naval base. His loyalty was not to a nation but to his craft and his purse, and his value lay in his profound understanding of the cartographic conventions of multiple regions, which allowed him to create forgeries so convincing they were indistinguishable from the real thing. Operating in this way was incredibly dangerous. If his double-dealing was ever discovered, he would become an enemy to every court he had ever served. In stark contrast to these shadowy freelancers were men like Angelino Dolcet, working from the vibrant maritime hub of Majorca in the 14th century. Dolcet was celebrated for the exceptional precision of his Portolan charts, navigational maps filled with detailed coastlines, and a web of room lines for plotting courses. Sailors and merchants trusted his work implicitly, which is precisely what made him so valuable to his patrons. The accuracy of his overall charts gave credibility to the specific, targeted deceptions he was asked to embed. A slight, almost imperceptible deviation in the rendering of a harbor depth, or the strategic placement of a tiny, innocent-looking cross near a secluded beach, could be a coded message about safe landing zones for supply ships or hidden sandbars meant to ensnare enemy vessels. Dolcet's genius was his ability to make the lie look like just another detail in a masterpiece of truth. Then there was Abraham Cresques, another luminary of the Majorcan school and a central figure in the creation of the legendary Catalan Atlas. He and his son Jehuda were so renowned for their skill and, more importantly, their unwavering discretion, that they were treated not merely as hired help but as valued members of the court of Aragon. The Catalan Atlas was presented as a gift to the future King Charles VI of France, and it was far more than a map. It was a statement of power, wealth, and geographical knowledge. Yet, scholars have long debated the hidden layers within it. The lavish illustrations of African kings holding gold nuggets were not just fanciful decoration. They were strategic intelligence, indicating regions rich in resources that the crown sought to control. The detailed rendering of trade routes across the Sahara served as both a practical guide and a visual claim to economic influence. The Cresques family's legacy is a testament to how absolute loyalty could elevate a craftsman to the highest echelons of society, their maps becoming instruments of statecraft that shaped foreign policy. For every cartographer who achieved fame and royal favor, however, there were countless others who operated in a constant state of precarious anxiety. The personal risks were immense and very real. A mapmaker who made an error in a deception or whose work was too easily decoded by a rival power could face accusations of treason. The punishment for such a failure, whether accidental or intentional, wasn't just the loss of a commission. It could mean imprisonment, exile, or execution. This constant pressure forced them to develop a culture of immense discretion. They communicated with patrons through coded messages and trusted intermediaries. They often worked alone or only with immediate family members they could trust with their lives. Many of their most sensitive techniques and ciphers were never written down, passed orally from master to apprentice, ensuring that if the apprentice was ever captured or turned, they could not betray the entire system. This is why so many of their secrets truly did die with them, lost to history and leaving modern scholars to piece together the puzzles they left behind. The enduring legacy of these notorious figures is a powerful reminder that history is not made by abstract forces but by complex individuals. Behind every phantom island, every encrypted symbol, and every distorted coastline, there was a person, an artist with a quill making a conscious choice. They were motivated by a blend of ambition for recognition, a desire for financial security, a sense of patriotic duty, or simply the intellectual thrill of executing the perfect deception. Their stories add a deeply human dimension to our understanding of these maps, transforming them from cold artifacts into narratives of cunning, courage, and sometimes profound moral conflict. They remind us that every line on a medieval map is a decision, and every decision tells a story about the person who drew it. But the true power of these economic deceptions lay in their subtlety and the collaborative web of secrecy that supported them. Cartographers rarely worked in isolation on these projects. They were often in direct collaboration with the powerful merchant guilds and banking houses that formed the backbone of the medieval economy. A mapmaker might be quietly commissioned by the Spice Guild of Venice to produce a chart for general use, while simultaneously creating a secret, accurate version for the guild's members alone. The public map would show a treacherous, monster-infested route around the Cape of Good Hope, discouraging any upstart competitors from attempting the journey. Meanwhile, the guild's private chart would detail the precise seasonal winds and safe harbors, giving their own fleets a monumental advantage. This insider knowledge created a self-reinforcing cycle of wealth and power. The guilds became phenomenally rich because of the hidden information, and they used that wealth to commission even more detailed and deceptive maps, further cementing their dominance. Bankers who financed these risky overseas voyages were also deeply complicit. They needed accurate information to assess risk and ensure their investments were sound, but they had a vested interest in keeping that knowledge from becoming public, as widespread access would dilute the tremendous profits they stood to make. A map in this context became a financial instrument as complex and valuable as a ledger, its lies directly convertible into gold. The most devastating economic impact came from the deliberate creation of artificial scarcity. Imagine the market for a precious commodity like silk or pepper, which traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road from Asia to Europe. The entire journey was a chain of intermediaries, each taking a cut and inflating the price. A king or a cartel of merchants could use a deceptive map to break this chain at a critical point. By omitting a key mountain pass that served as a vital link for a trading rival, they could effectively strangle that competitor's supply line. Suddenly, a caravan that had been taking a reliable, well-known route for years would find itself lost, delayed, or forced onto a much more dangerous path. The goods would either fail to arrive on time or arrive in such small quantities that the price would skyrocket. The group that controlled the accurate map, however, could continue to receive their goods via a hidden alternative route, and they would be perfectly positioned to sell their now rare commodities at an exorbitant markup. This wasn't just competition, it was economic sabotage using geography as the weapon. The resulting price spikes could destabilize entire regions, cause inflation, and even trigger riots in cities that suddenly found their access to essential spices or textiles cut off. A single omitted line on a map could thus ignite a trade war or topple a merchant republic that had grown dependent on a now blockaded route. The ripple effects of this cartographic manipulation are still being traced by economic historians today, who study tax records, ship manifests, and price ledgers to understand the true scale of the deception. They might find that the port city of Genoa experienced a sudden, unexplained economic boom in the 1300s, while its rival Pisa fell into a rapid decline. The historical record might not explicitly say the Genoese used a fake map to ruin Pisa, but by cross-referencing the known trade routes with the maps from that period, a pattern emerges. The maps available to Pisan merchants show a coastline that is inaccurate in very specific ways, leading to navigational errors and shipwrecks that are meticulously recorded in insurance documents. Meanwhile, a unique and highly accurate chart is discovered in a Genoese banking family's private archive, a map that correctly shows the safe channels the Pisans could not find. This kind of detective work reveals that the flow of wealth in the medieval world was not just a product of fair trade and natural advantage, but was often artificially engineered through the strategic dissemination of lies. The economic landscape of Europe, with its powerful city-states and trading empires, was quite literally drawn into existence by cartographers who understood that controlling information was the ultimate key to controlling the market. The golden age of medieval map deception could not last forever. The very forces that made maps so powerful, the expansion of trade, the dawn of exploration, and the invention of the printing press, ultimately began to dismantle the cartographers' artful lies. When maps started rolling off printing presses in the 15th and 16th centuries, they were no longer unique, priceless artifacts locked away in a royal library. They became commodities reproduced by the hundreds and sold in shops across Europe. This widespread availability was a double-edged sword for those in power. On one hand, it disseminated geographical knowledge more broadly than ever before. On the other, it created a crowd-sourced system of fact-checking. If a ship captain in Lisbon purchased a map showing a phantom island, but a captain in Amsterdam had a chart from a different publisher that showed nothing but open ocean in that same spot, the deception would be exposed. The monopoly on geographic information was broken, and with it, the ability to sustain grand, blatant fabrications. This push toward accuracy was supercharged by the scientific revolution and the rise of rigorous surveying techniques. The invention of tools like the theodolite and the quadrant allowed for precise astronomical observations and land measurements. Cartographers were no longer just artists interpreting travelers' tales. They were becoming scientists relying on mathematics and repeatable observation. This new breed of mapmaker, figures like Gerardus Mercator with his revolutionary projection, sought to create a systematic and objective representation of the world, a tool for navigation that could be trusted implicitly. International cooperation also began to emerge, albeit slowly. Nations realized that for global trade to flourish, they needed a common, reliable understanding of coastlines and sea lanes. This didn't erase national rivalries, but it did create a shared incentive for a baseline of cartographic truth. A map that could get a Dutch merchant ship safely to the East Indies would also benefit an English or French vessel, and that mutual benefit began to outweigh the temporary advantage of a clever deception. Yet to think that this evolution led to perfectly honest maps would be a profound misunderstanding. The nature of the deception simply evolved, becoming more subtle and politically sophisticated. The blatant phantom island gave way to the manipulated border, the disputed place name, and the strategically omitted military installation. As European powers carved up the world through colonialism, maps became the primary tools for asserting those claims. A British map of India might deliberately blur the borders of independent princely states to suggest they were already under imperial control. A French chart of Africa might draw its claimed territories with a bold, solid line, while using a faint, broken line for the borders of a rival's colony, visually undermining their legitimacy. These were not errors, they were calculated acts of cartographic persuasion, designed to influence international opinion and stake a claim on paper that could later be enforced on the ground. This legacy of subtle bias is absolutely alive in our modern digital world. Every time you open a mapping application on your phone, you are viewing a product of countless human decisions about what to include, what to exclude, and how to name things. Look at a global map from the United States, and you might find yourself centered on the Americas. Open one in Russia, and the perspective shifts to highlight Eurasia. This is a modern form of the same centering bias seen in the Hereford Mappa Mundi, just with a technological gloss. More seriously, governments continue to exercise strict control over the most detailed topographic maps and satellite imagery. In countries around the world, sensitive locations, military bases, power plants, government residences are routinely blurred or digitally altered on public-facing maps like Google Earth for national security reasons. This is the direct descendant of the medieval cartographer omitting a mountain pass. The motive is identical, only the methodology has changed. The journey from the blatant deceptions of the Middle Ages to the nuanced biases of today tells a deeper story about our relationship with truth and power. It shows a gradual, hard-won progression toward objectivity, driven by science and a globalized economy that demands reliable information, but it also reveals an enduring and perhaps permanent tension. We may have traded the sea monster for a pixelated building, but the human impulse to shape reality through the map remains. The map is still never a perfect mirror of the world. It is a reflection of the priorities, fears, and ambitions of the people who make it. The quest for cartographic honesty is not a battle that can be won, but a constant negotiation. A reminder that every time we draw a line, we are making a choice about what story we want to tell. For centuries, the intricate lies woven into medieval maps remained locked away, protected by the yellowed vellum and fading inks that gave them an air of untouchable authority. A king's secret, once committed to parchment, seemed secure forever. But the tools of modern science have become the ultimate locksmiths, prying open these ancient deceptions with a clarity that would have terrified the cartographers who crafted them. This isn't just about proving a map wrong. It's a form of high-tech historical archaeology, allowing us to peer directly into the mind of the mapmaker and watch them in the very act of creation, and sometimes of forgery. The laboratory has become the new royal court, where technology now sits in judgment of the artful lies of the past. One of the most powerful tools in this forensic arsenal is multispectral imaging, a process that feels like giving historians a time machine. By examining a map under different wavelengths of light from ultraviolet to infrared, researchers can see beneath the surface in ways the human eye never could. Faint pencil lines, erased text, or entire earlier drafts hidden under layers of paint suddenly become visible. Imagine studying a famous map that shows a phantom island, and through this technology, detecting the faint, ghostly outline of that same island being meticulously erased in an earlier version. This reveals the cartographer's second thoughts or perhaps direct orders from a patron to add the deception. We can see them literally sketching out the lie, watching the geographic truth disappear under a new layer of ink intended to mislead. It's like discovering the rough draft of a historical novel and finding the author's original, truthful ending scribbled in the margins before it was changed to suit a publisher. The chemical composition of the map itself is another star witness in this investigation. Techniques like X-ray fluorescence spectrometry allow scientists to analyze the pigments in the inks without damaging the priceless artifact. This is how the infamous Vinland Map was largely debunked. Its ink contained anatase, a specific form of titanium dioxide that wasn't commercially available until the 20th century, glaringly anachronistic for a document purporting to be medieval. But even with genuine period maps, pigment analysis tells a story. A map might use an incredibly expensive blue made from crushed lapis lazuli for the king's territories, but a common, cheap carbon black for the lands of his rivals, a silent chemical commentary on their relative importance. Similarly, analysis of the parchment itself can reveal its origin. By examining the collagen structure and even the pattern of wormholes, experts can determine if the animal skin came from a region that matches the map's supposed origin story, or if it was likely sourced from elsewhere, raising immediate red flags about the map's authenticity. Perhaps the most dramatic technological revolution has come from above, in the form of satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning. We can now take a medieval map that shows a fortress guarding a strategic mountain pass, and with a few clicks, have a satellite confirm that no such ruins exist there, or that the terrain is utterly unsuitable for such a structure. Conversely, LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map the ground beneath forest canopies, has revealed the faint, ghostly outlines of long-lost roads and settlements that exactly match the routes shown on maps previously dismissed as fanciful. This technology doesn't just debunk deceptions, it occasionally validates the hidden truths that some maps contained. A cartographer might have been forced to omit a real harbor to protect it, but he may have left a tiny, almost invisible symbol in its place. Satellite confirmation turns that symbol from a curious doodle into a confirmed, deliberate clue, a whisper of truth meant for those who knew how to listen. This ongoing detective work is a profound collaboration between the humanities and the hard sciences, transforming our understanding from speculation into verified fact. Each technological breakthrough is like turning on a brighter light in a dark room. We see more detail, more clues, and more of the human hands that crafted these magnificent deceptions. It proves that no matter how clever the lie, how skilled the artist, or how powerful the patron who commissioned it, truth has a stubborn way of persisting. The secrets that were once the exclusive property of kings and their trusted mapmakers are now being laid bare for all to see, revealing that the real treasure hidden in these maps wasn't gold or land, but the fascinating, complex story of how we have always tried to shape the world to our will. This enduring legacy of medieval map deception is far more than a historical curiosity. It's a direct and urgent mirror reflecting the central challenges of our own information age. The same core dynamics that played out on parchment centuries ago are now unfolding on our digital screens, where maps are no longer static but interactive, algorithmically generated, and instantly accessible to billions. The temptation to manipulate spatial information for power, profit, or influence hasn't vanished. It has simply evolved, becoming more sophisticated and pervasive than any medieval king could have ever imagined. We are all now constant consumers of digital cartography, from the navigation apps that guide our daily commutes to the satellite imagery we scroll through for fun. And each of these platforms carries its own subtle set of biases and potential deceptions. A tech giant might subtly prioritize its own business partners on its local search maps, shaping our economic choices. A government might digitally alter satellite images of a sensitive military site or a contested border, just as their ancestors might have omitted a mountain pass. The medium has changed from ink to pixels, but the underlying motive, to control perception by controlling the map, remains strikingly familiar. This historical perspective arms us with a crucial dose of healthy skepticism, a necessary tool for navigating a world saturated with data visualizations and targeted information. Understanding that a medieval cartographer worked for a patron with a specific agenda makes it easier to recognize that a modern mapping application is also created by a company with its own set of goals, whether that's maximizing user engagement, selling advertising, or promoting a particular corporate ecosystem. The map is never a completely neutral window onto the world. It is a curated view, a product of countless human decisions about what to include, what to emphasize, and what to leave out. The phantom islands of the past have their direct descendants in the digital realm, misleading data visualizations, deepfake satellite imagery, or algorithmically generated traffic patterns that can be manipulated to create a false impression of congestion or activity. Recognizing this continuity is the first step toward becoming a more discerning citizen of the digital world. Perhaps the most profound modern parallel lies in the realm of big data and privacy. Medieval kings used maps to control the movement of people and goods, to monitor trade routes, and to identify strategic vulnerabilities. Today, the most valuable maps aren't just the ones we look at. They are the ones being constantly drawn about us. Every time we use a navigation app, every check-in on a social media platform, every location tag on a photo contributes to a vast, real-time map of human activity. Corporations and governments are the new cartographers, and this behavioral data is their priceless parchment. They use it to build detailed profiles, predict our movements, influence our purchases, and even shape our political views. The deception here is often one of omission. We are rarely fully informed about how this data is collected, connected, and used. Our personal landscapes are being charted and sold without our explicit consent, turning each of us into an unwitting landmark on a map we never agreed to be on. This is the ultimate evolution of the mapmaker's art, not just drawing the world, but actively constructing and manipulating the digital reality in which we live. Ultimately, the lesson from the medieval mapmakers is not that we should distrust all maps, but that we must approach them with context and critical thinking. They teach us to always ask the same fundamental questions: who made this? Who paid for it? What might they want me to see? And more importantly, what might they want me to miss? This mindset is our best defense against modern misinformation, whether it's a deliberately misleading infographic, a doctored satellite photo in a conflict zone, or a biased algorithm shaping our view of local news and events. By appreciating the power that visual information has always had to shape reality, we reclaim our own agency. We learn to seek out multiple sources, to question the default view, and to understand that every representation of the world, from a vellum masterpiece to a glowing smartphone screen, is a story. And as the medieval kings and cartographers knew all too well, the one who controls the story controls the world. So what can we, living in an age of satellites and instant information, possibly learn from the deceptions of a medieval draftsman with a quill? The answer is everything. These ancient mapmakers have bequeathed to us a masterclass in critical thinking, their intricate forgeries serving as timeless textbooks on the art of questioning what we see. Their work forces us to adopt a mindset of healthy skepticism, to understand that every piece of information, from a stunningly illustrated vellum chart to a sleek digital map on our phone, comes from a creator with a perspective, an agenda, and a purpose. The first and most crucial lesson is to always interrogate the source. When a medieval courtier unrolled a new map, his first question wouldn't be, "What does this show?" but "Who made this and for whom?" He knew a map commissioned by the King of France would tell a very different story about a contested border than one made for the English crown. This instinct is our greatest defense today. Before we share a startling news article or accept a viral infographic as fact, we must train ourselves to ask that same set of questions. Who is behind this information? What organization funded this study? What might they gain from my believing this narrative? This isn't about cynicism. It's about intellectual self-defense, a practice the medieval mind understood was necessary for survival. Beyond simply identifying the creator, we must learn to look for what isn't there, to develop an eye for the strategic silence. A medieval cartographer protected his king's secrets not only by adding false islands, but by leaving real ports and mountain passes off the map entirely. These omissions were the most powerful deceptions of all because they were so difficult to detect. In our modern landscape, this translates to understanding algorithmic bias and the curated nature of our digital feeds. The news we don't see, the perspectives our social media platforms fail to recommend, the search results that languish on the second page, these are the omitted mountain passes of our information age. A critical thinker actively seeks out these gaps, consciously consulting a diverse range of sources to piece together a more complete picture of the world, knowing that any single source, no matter how authoritative it appears, will always have its blank spaces and edges populated with monsters of its own making. Finally, the mapmakers teach us the value of cross-referencing and technological verification. Medieval explorers who survived were the ones who never relied on a single chart. They compared notes from multiple sailors, observed the stars for themselves, and trusted the evidence of their own eyes when the map didn't match the reality. Today, we have powerful tools for this very purpose. Fact-checking websites, reverse image search, and satellite imagery are our equivalents of the astrolabe and the compass. The process of uncovering the Vinland Map's deception through ink analysis is a powerful metaphor for our times. We don't have to accept information at face value. We can subject it to scrutiny, checking its provenance against other reliable sources, and using technology to reveal the digital fingerprints of manipulation. The goal is not to descend into paranoia, believing nothing at all, but to ascend to a more informed and empowered state of engagement. By adopting the mapmaker's mindset, understanding their methods of deception, we ironically inoculate ourselves against modern versions of the same tricks. We become the savvy courtiers in a global digital court, able to appreciate the beauty of the information presented to us while still possessing the wisdom to look for the hidden warnings sketched in the margins. There is something undeniably magnetic about the idea that a simple piece of parchment could be the key to a fortune, a secret history, or a forgotten world. This is the romantic heart that beats within the chest of every cartographic deception, transforming these documents from mere historical artifacts into timeless vessels of adventure. It is the whisper of possibility, the tantalizing what-if that has fueled imaginations for centuries. We are not just looking at an old map, we are gazing at a riddle, a challenge left behind by a clever mind from another age, inviting us to become detectives in a centuries-old mystery. This powerful allure elevates the study of these deceptions far beyond academic curiosity, tapping into a deep, almost primal, human desire for discovery and the thrill of the chase. It is the reason why a faded chart in a museum glass case can make our hearts beat a little faster, as we wonder if we might be the first to finally see the clue that everyone else has missed. This potent blend of art and intrigue has provided the foundational blueprint for some of our most enduring stories and legends. Think of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel, Treasure Island, which opens with the unforgettable discovery of Captain Flint's map in the sea chest of the old sailor Billy Bones. That map, with its cross marking the spot of buried loot, is the engine of the entire plot, a perfect fictional representation of the power these documents hold over us. The entire adventure, the voyage, the mutiny, the battle on the beach springs directly from the secrets held within that drawn coastline. This archetype has been repeated and reinvented endlessly, from the elaborate map on the back of the Declaration of Independence in National Treasure to the ancient, mystical charts guiding explorers to El Dorado or the Fountain of Youth. These fictional tales are direct descendants of the very real hopes and fears that medieval and Renaissance Europeans projected onto the blank spaces of their maps. The cartographers who drew sea monsters to mark unknown perils were, in a sense, the original fantasy world builders, and our modern storytellers are simply continuing their tradition. This enduring appeal speaks to a fundamental truth about how we engage with history itself. We often think of the past as a fixed and settled record, a series of dates and events that have been neatly catalogued and understood. But the existence of these masterful deceptions shatters that illusion, revealing history instead as a dynamic, contested narrative, a palimpsest where truths have been written over by lies, and where those lies have, over time, become a fascinating part of the story themselves. Studying a forged map or a deliberately altered coastline forces us to become active participants in unraveling the past. We are no longer passive consumers of facts. We are joining a conversation across the centuries, trying to outsmart a long-dead strategist and see through their carefully constructed illusion. It is a form of intellectual time travel that blends the analytical rigor of a scholar with the intuitive leap of a sleuth, a combination that is as deeply satisfying as it is educational. Ultimately, the romantic power of the Mapmaker's Deception lies in its beautiful paradox. These were instruments of control, created to mislead, protect, and manipulate for the most pragmatic of reasons, to win wars, amass wealth, and consolidate power. Yet, centuries later, that original purpose has often faded into the background. What remains is the mystery, the art, and the story. The very lies meant to obscure the truth have become, in their own right, some of the most truthful representations we have of the anxieties, ambitions, and worldviews of the people who made them. They remind us that the greatest treasure these maps contain is not gold or silver, but a glimpse into the human spirit, our endless capacity for creativity, our thirst for knowledge, and our irresistible urge to leave behind a puzzle for someone else to solve. This is why the hunt is never truly over. There will always be another line to decipher, another symbol to interpret, and another secret waiting patiently in plain sight. Reflecting on the incredible journey we've taken through the shadowy world of medieval mapmaking, it's astonishing to see just how deeply these centuries-old deceptions are woven into the very fabric of our modern lives. Those cartographers hunched over their parchment by candlelight weren't just drawing coastlines, they were designing reality itself, using ink and vellum to redirect the flow of history, wealth, and power. Their phantom islands didn't just vanish when explorers failed to find them. They left a permanent mark on our understanding of the world, reminding us that the most effective lies are often the ones we never think to question. This legacy is far more than a historical footnote. It's a powerful lens through which to view our own relationship with truth, authority, and the information that shapes our decisions every single day. In many ways, we are living in the golden age of the mapmaker's art, though the tools have changed from quills to algorithms. The customized digital maps on our phones, the curated news feeds on our social media, the targeted advertisements that seem to read our minds. These are all modern descendants of the Hereford Mappa Mundi's theological framing or the strategically omitted mountain pass. They are curated realities designed to guide our behavior, shape our perceptions, and serve the agendas of their creators, whether that's a tech giant, a government, or a corporation. The medieval king who wanted to project an image of invincibility is not so different from the modern platform that filters our world to maximize engagement and profit. The medium has evolved from parchment to pixels, but the fundamental human impulse to control the narrative by controlling the map remains utterly unchanged. This isn't a cause for despair, but rather a call to arms, an invitation to embrace the critical thinking skills that these historical deceptions so vividly illustrate. The greatest gift these long-dead cartographers have given us is not a specific fact or a corrected coastline, but a mindset. They teach us to approach every piece of information, especially the most visually authoritative ones, with a sense of curious and discerning skepticism. To always ask the essential questions: who made this, who paid for it, what do they want me to see, and what might they be hoping I'll overlook? This intellectual self-defense is our most valuable tool in an era where misinformation can be generated and disseminated at a scale those medieval mapmakers could never have conceived. So the next time you open a mapping app to find a restaurant or glance at a date, a visualization in the news, take a moment to appreciate the hidden history behind that simple image. See it not just as a guide, but as a story with an author, a purpose, and a perspective. Let that awareness empower you to seek out multiple sources, to question the default view, and to become the cartographer of your own understanding. The journey to uncover truth is never truly over. It just requires us to read between the lines. If you've enjoyed deciphering these ancient secrets with me, feel free to like this video and subscribe for more adventures into history's hidden corners. I'd love to hear which deception fascinated you the most. Was it the Phantom Islands, the encrypted symbols, or the cunning omissions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, keep exploring.